Hey guys, welcome to episode 4 of Oxbridge Study Secrets. In this video, I'm going to show you some handwritten revision notes that I made when I studied at Cambridge University, run you through my process for making them, and then more importantly, tell you my techniques for reviewing those notes. Guys, this video is long, but please stick with it because it's going to be packed with valuable insights. But before we do that, let's get one thing clear. Everyone has their own unique optimum way of making revision notes, so no two students will ever have identical revision notes. So what this means is use the ideas I put forward in this video, but don't take them to be the only good way of making revision notes. To paraphrase the martial artist Bruce Lee, adapt what is useful from what I share, reject what is useless and doesn't work for you, and most importantly, add your own unique twist to your notes. You guys ready? Let's jump in. So this first set of notes I'm showing you is from my second year when I was doing chemical engineering on a fun topic called equilibrium stage processes. Actually, it wasn't fun at all and I nearly failed that module, but more on that story another time. Alright, now I really like these notes because of their simplicity. All it took was one of those 4-color pens, where I used the black for standard words, then green, blue and red for keywords. I then had a separate gel-based red pen and a blue pen for underlining, writing titles, headings and formulae, and drawing boxes around those formulae. So nothing too special at all, right? In these notes, I really like the use of space. These notes aren't too cramped, and I found them really easy to revise from. It's so important to remember that the more aesthetic and easy to read our notes are, the easier it is to review them, and the more we actually want to review them. Also, if you notice, the handwriting is a good size and it doesn't change too much towards the end of the page. What happens to a lot of us is we start rushing the longer we make notes for because we get bored or our hands get tired and we engage with the content we're writing less. So we start to write with worse handwriting. So none of that here, which is a good sign. Now, let's talk about the content I've written and the level of detail I've gone into, because I know a lot of students ask, how much detail should I go into with revision notes? Unfortunately, the answer is ambiguous. It really depends on you, the subject you're doing, and how well you understand it. So with this one, the content of the notes themselves is detailed enough, but not too detailed. I didn't copy out the lecture notes, but I made sure to get all the key phrases and definitions I needed, and I wrote longer sentences and bullet points on the things I didn't understand. When it comes to detail, we've got to find the balance between doing enough to make notes that are going to be useful for our studying, while not doing so much that we don't have enough time to spend on other forms of revision. For me, I know my notes are generally more detailed than those of others I know, and that's because I like to revise from only my notes once I made them, so I wasn't looking at lecture slides or a textbook again. So I actually made study plans which accounted for me spending more time on my notes to make the content more detailed. But this was just my personal preference. In the end, our review process is so much more important than the notes that we make. And if you adapt the method I'll teach you later for reviewing notes, you can actually get away with directly reviewing what you see in the textbook. Now, I'm not going to endorse that method, but if you're short on time and desperate, it's a really useful method to know. But before we get there, I want to show you an example of not so good notes. So take a look at these ones from my first year at Cambridge, when I was doing natural sciences. Now, the left one is on a material science topic called reversible polarization and ferroelectrics, and the right one, which might have some familiar diagrams, is on organic chemistry. Guys, the problem with these notes is they are just too cramped. I could barely read my own handwriting, it was so small and messy. And even though I was still using tools like diagrams to explain concepts and using colours and underlining to highlight keywords visually, the notes themselves were not easy to revise from, which is why I resolved to put more work into my notes in the following years. So here's a really useful technical point about how I made my notes. I used a technique called dual coding to encode the content I was trying to learn into my mind more effectively. Now, we'll talk more about things like this when we cover topics like learning more effectively in future videos. But basically, the more ways we use to encode content in our mind through getting more of our senses involved, visual, touch, auditory, and so on, the better our ability to recall the content of those notes becomes. Dual coding is the most common example, when we use two different ways to encode the content into our brain. So in other words, we're learning it in two different ways. So in this case, I was making dual coded revision notes by combining verbal material, i.e. the written words, with visual material, the colours I was using and the diagrams I drew. This is such a good method for learning, and we're actually going to build on it later when we come to reviewing our revision notes. Speaking of which, let's get to my third year notes. So I actually tried something different in my third year, where instead of using single pages, I would take a double page spread from a specific notebook that I bought just for that topic. And I'd make my notes on the right hand page first, and I would draw any visual content on the left hand page. Now if you're wondering why not the other way around, it's because I'm left-handed, and I didn't want to smudge my notes when my hand brushed over the left page when I started writing on the right hand side. Left-handed people problems, I know. So anyway, here's some of my third year revision notes from a topic called Operational Production Machines, where you can see this at work. So guys, as you can see, content on the right hand side, diagrams on the left. As you can see here, compared to second year, I expanded my repertoire of coloured pens, and I also brought out a highlighter. Guys, here I had no set pattern with the colours I used. I just went with the flow. I wish I could tell you there was a process to it, but I was just going with the flow. I was making so many notes that year, so it was a balance between being creative to avoid monotony and to stimulate the visual parts of my brain, but at the same time not spending too much time on each set of notes and trying to be as efficient as possible. Here's another set of notes I actually made on an economics-based topic in that third year of manufacturing engineering. Similar theme to before, no specific colour scheme, but it's visually stimulating. It's easy for me to review, though my handwriting was getting pretty small here. And again, we have the content on the right page and the diagrams on the left page. Guys, as you can see, my notes aren't the prettiest notes at all. They're really not. But that was never my intention. I love it when I see people with pristine, beautifully drawn out revision notes. But if you're short on time, you've got to ask yourself what the most efficient way of creating great revision notes would be. I generally try to give myself a 10-minute limit per page at most. For me, as long as my notes were legible, appealing to look at, and not too cramped, I knew I was good to go. Because the truth is that writing your notes the first time isn't going to ingrain that content into your brain. It's reviewing your notes that's going to help with that. Your notes need to be detailed enough and aesthetically nice enough for you to want to review them, but that's it. So here's my method for reviewing notes. And as I said, you could probably get away with doing this directly from a textbook and still get so much out of it, but I don't endorse that method. So here's my method. First, I would reread my notes aloud when reviewing them, often varying my tone, my volume, my pace, doing different accents even, and so on to link that specific content that I've written down with stronger auditory associations. So basically bring in my sense of hearing to encode the information in that way. I would also read notes aloud as if I was teaching the content to a class or explaining a concept to someone younger than me who'd never heard it before. Now this is such an effective technique because convincing our brain that we not only need to recall content, but that we must also be able to teach or explain it in a simple and clear way really makes us learn it and remember it with greater clarity. Best of all, if I found myself struggling to explain a concept, it often means that I didn't understand it fully. I then add it to my list of weaker topics and set aside time in my plan to focus on it in more detail. When reviewing my revision notes for a textbook, I would always have a scrap sheet of paper beside me where I would rewrite the keywords and concepts as I read them aloud. Now, I had no intention of keeping this scrap sheet of paper after finishing my review because the writing was messy, unstructured, and impossible to revise from. Guys, here's an example. As you can see, it's horrible. You can't even read the thing. But the purpose of making scrap notes was simply to reinforce the content that I was reviewing at that instant, creating a dual coding connection between the words I was reading and speaking out aloud and the ones I was writing on this scrap sheet of paper. I would repeat this process every single time I reviewed my notes. Occasionally I'd also test myself using the read, write, recite, repeat technique. I would read through a section, rewrite it on a scrap sheet of paper, and then cover both of them up with a plain sheet of paper. I'd then recite the content I was trying to memorize until I was successful in doing so, and I'd repeat this process until the notes were fully reviewed. So here's the thing. The time-consuming nature of handwritten notes meant that I had to set aside enough time to make detailed, dual-coded notes on all the topics. So I was only able to follow this ideal revision note making process when I had a good plan, like I had in my third year, where I actually started planning my revision 4 months before my final exams. So I knew exactly when I was going to be making notes and on what topic. Actually, planning is a time management topic that I can't wait to cover with you guys in these videos. But look, I'll admit, there were so many occasions where I just didn't have the time to create handwritten notes, and I resorted to typed notes instead. So that's what we're going to cover in the next video, is how to get the most out of those typed revision notes when we don't have time to dedicate to handwritten notes. And I'm going to show you again some of my personal examples. Guys, this video has been long. Thank you so much for bearing with me. I really hope it's been useful. Please do comment, DM me with ideas on videos or things that you found useful from this video or things you'd like me to add, and I'll get to it. Please do like, share and subscribe to this video. That's it for now. Keep growing, keep striving, keep shining.